Do you ever get caught up in wanting to do what's right and what's good, that you totally forget why those things are, in fact, right and good? I know I do. In fact, we do a lot of things out of spiritual habit. And today, I want to look at two things we do that are good and right and remind you why we do those things. I'm Jenny Brown, and I'm happy to bring you a word on this Maundy Thursday. Maundy coming from the Latin word mandatum, which means command. The two spiritual habits I refer to today come from the Gospels and take place during the time we observe Maundy Thursday. I'm going to start by giving you two words to think about: remember and love. Let's look at that first word, remember. Now, on the evening before Christ's crucifixion on Maundy Thursday, Jesus and his disciples are in the upper room observing Passover, which was an observance or a remembrance of God's delivering the Israelites out of the bondage of slavery in Egypt. And it's during this observance that Jesus introduces a new observance by way of the Lord's Supper, or communion, as you might call it. And he does this for the very first time. Now, we find this account in 3 of the 4 Gospels: Matthew 26, Mark 14, and Luke 22, where Jesus takes the bread, blesses it, gives thanks for it, and then he passes it out to his disciples, referring to it as his body given for them. And he does the same with the cup and passes it, this time referring to it as his blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. And it's then that he tells or commands his disciples to remember. Luke 22:19, Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me." Remember the forgiveness of sins, and remember his sacrifice on the cross, resulting in deliverance from the bondage of slavery, not from Egypt, but from sin. Now, at the time, the disciples most likely didn't have a clue what Jesus was referring to. But looking at Scripture, you and I, we can see clearly what act of love he's referring to when he says, remember. And it's for that reason that we observe the Lord's Supper, or take communion, the way that we do. Because Jesus declared it the new covenant. Now, let's look at that second word, love. In the Gospel of John, Jesus shows his love to his disciples on Maundy Thursday in a way that is very uncommon and was very uncommon. And that was by washing their feet, their gross, dirty, dusty feet. Now, this was an act reserved for servants or those in a lowlier position. But it's during this great act of love that Jesus tells his disciples that this is how they are to love one another. And we see this account in John 13. Verse 15, Jesus says, "For I have given you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you." So he gives them the example of an act of love. And then later in the chapter, in verse 34, he gives a new command. He says, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another." Now, sometimes I forget to love altogether. Sometimes I choose to love because I know that's how I'm supposed to live. But today I'd like to remind you to love not just because it's right and good, and it is right and good, but because Jesus has first shown his love to you, and as we see here in Scripture, he commands it. So as you prepare your hearts for Easter, are you honestly observing and remembering his sacrifice on the cross? Are you loving those around you because Jesus commands that of you and has shown you how to do it? And how are you doing that? Maybe it's inviting someone to church, but not just because Pastor Nate has asked you to do so, but because you truly love them and want them to know Jesus like you do. Maybe it's inviting a friend over for a meal, building a deeper relationship with them. How are you loving with the love of Christ? So today, I'm going to leave you with those two words as we observe this Maundy Thursday. Remember and love. Remember Christ's sacrifice on the cross for us and love one another the way Christ has loved us.